Welcome, welcome, everybody. I'm super excited. We are very thrilled to have you join us this SEP Talk today. For those that I have not the opportunity to meet you yet, my name is Diana Daniels. I am SEP 2018, and I am your host for this event today. We are very honored to have my very good friend, Paola Bonomo. Paola is an amazing expert on governance. And when I have the opportunity to talk to her about talking to us on this topic, she was very kind enough to say, yes, let's going to make it happen. Before reading you out, guys, what Paola has been doing, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this session is being recorded, and because the recording will be shared with some other attendees, especially those guys that are based on different time zones. So ideally, we can share this with them. So please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button. We will address them as soon as we can. Paola is going to introduce with some of the topics, and hopefully we can make this a very dynamic and interactive session. We encourage you to take notes and engage actively in the discussion. I also want to remind everybody about our SEP reunion in India. If you haven't booked yet, please do so. Go to sepreunion.com. You will see all the details in there. It's going to be November 21 to 24. We have an amazing lineup of the speakers, faculty, directors, professors that are coming, and it's going to be just an amazing time. So hopefully we can see you right over there. All right. So without further ado, let's dive in. And when we spoke about like the challenges of joining a board, and then how this can bring immense strategic and personal benefits, while opening the doors to all these new opportunities, enhancing our professional profile. Either you are interested in corporate or nonprofit or advisory, startups, public boards. Well, this webinar will provide you with valuable insights that we hope to get on this topic. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Paola Bonomo. Paola, she began her career at McKinsey & Company, working on the top management at the large Italian and international companies on issues of strategic positioning, growth, entry into new markets, alliances, acquisitions. Then he held leadership roles such as the senior director of European operations at eBay. She was the head of online services and commercial operations at Vodafone Italia, and she was the regional director for the Southern Europe at Facebook. She is currently serving on boards of directors such as AXA, AXA, Assicurazioni, P4, Tisal Group, and she's also an advisory board member at two fintech companies, Moneyform and Euclid. Paola is also the president of the Stanford Club in Italy. She's a local Stanford University alumni as well, and I'm very proud to call her my friend. Thank you, Paola, for being with us.
Thank you, Diana. And I think you must have picked some information from around the web, because some of those roles are not current anymore. Especially, I am no longer the chair of the Italian chapter of the Stanford Alumni Association. I handed that over to someone else about 4 years ago, but obviously I continue being very involved. Nevertheless, what you said is true in terms of my rather varied experiences in terms of boards and governance over the last 10 to 15 years. And of course, I'm happy to go in more detail if people have questions, but it's all out on LinkedIn. Basically, I think you've shared your profile already. You've shared my profile already. And as far as the audience goes, my understanding is you are all SEP alumni, and most of you are relatively new to the topic of what it's like to be on a board. other than perhaps your own, if you're founders and entrepreneurs, and obviously you sit on your own board, but not a lot of other people's or other companies' boards. Do I have that correct, Diana, more or less?
I think that we have a very good mix in between experienced board members, new board members, VCs that are building their boards, or the executive board members as well. So I can see around the screen, and I see a very nice mix of people in there.
Fantastic. So for those of you who have more experience, obviously, this may be a little bit repetitive, but it's for the benefit of those of you who have less experience. So just bear with me, and if what I'm talking about is too basic, let me know that I should speed up. But I wanted to start this talk and later Q&A by making sure that if you join another company's board, you do it for the right reasons. And there are a number of right reasons to do it, but there's also a number of very wrong reasons that I want you to stay away from. So what are good or possibly good reasons for wanting to join a board? One is if you believe your full-time executive career in one company has kind of come to an end in terms of a stage of your life, and you want to develop a new career as a non-executive director or someone who has a portfolio of boards or possibly boards of directors and advisory board roles or consulting roles or whatever, where having board seats gives you the opportunity to be exposed to different things and to keep learning and not sort of, ossify your knowledge around the last full-time job you had. And that's a very valid reason, I believe. In fact, I did it myself a few years ago when I left my last full-time role with a boss. I said, I no longer really want to have a boss. And so I want to have a portfolio of directorships. Another good reason could be, you're not leaving your day job, but you want to learn about another sector or develop skills because you have an inkling that perhaps the way that industry trends are playing out in another industry could be something that you learn and take back home and maybe apply to your own core job and core and your daily work, so to speak. And that's another good reason. Another good reason is, I want to have more of a professional network because I want to, meet professionals who are in other walks of life, other industries, other stages of their career, etc. And another one could be, you want to be of service, especially if you're serving on the board of a nonprofit. If you are serving, let's say, on the board of a state or government-owned company, and you do it because you want to basically be patriotic and help your government achieve the goals that they want to achieve through that particular company. So those are possibly right reasons, obviously with pluses and minuses, but I want to make sure that make it clear that I believe all of them are valid. I think why not to join a board is also something that you have to take into consideration quite clearly. One of the reasons why not to join a board is ambition. I mean, it's very rarely a path to the CEO, to a CEO job. And sometimes, of course, you hear that someone becomes the CEO of a company and was picked from among the current board members of the company. But really, when there's a CEO transition, the majority of the cases, it's either someone who's come through the ranks of the same company as an executive or someone who's plucked as an executive from another company. It's neither necessary nor not sufficient it sometimes happens that a board member becomes a CEO, but it's by no means a regular occurrence. So I would encourage you to consider it rather rare. Another reason why not to join a board is money. You don't get rich. And again, you probably know this already. This depends a little bit on, markets and jurisdictions and board roles at large companies versus small companies, etc. But let's say, typically, if you have the chance to shoot for CEO and money is important to you, let's say more than work-life balance or whatever, then don't waste your time doing too many non-executive board roles. Another very wrong reason to join a board is because you think it's risk-free money. It is not. Being on a board, it comes with consequences and responsibilities. It can come with civil and criminal liability. If things go badly, you can spend a lot of time in court or with lawyers. Only in the very worst cases you go to jail, but even if you don't go to jail, it's unpleasant enough that you regret joining that board. So, you can think of all sorts of examples. You're on the board of Boeing and your airplane explodes, or you have an environmental liability, or you're a railway and there's an accident killing 10 people. I mean, all of these things happen. And when you have a crisis of that type, obviously, a lot of people who are on that board wish they had never joined that board. I have a friend who was a board member about 10 years ago at a troubled bank, and one of the employees of that bank, a top manager, actually the communication director of the bank, died suddenly one night and was found on the pavement below the window of the office a few floors up. And people believe he committed suicide, but people also believe that he was pushed out the window or whatever. So those are very, very bad situations where to be a board member. Another friend I have was a board member at Wirecard, which, as you know, is a case of massive corporate fraud. So, do your due diligence. Because things can get really badly, really quickly. And even if you, as a board member, did nothing wrong, and even if you always did the right thing, your reputation will be questioned and maybe tarnished for a very, very long time. So the most important thing to keep in mind as you think about boards is do your due diligence on, who else is on the board. Do they understand what they're doing? And do they treat that responsibility with the utmost care and attention that it deserves? Having scared you enough, I think I will move on to the second most important thing to do and to keep in mind, actually. And to me, in my experience, it's a little bit like who wants you on that board? Because obviously you volunteer to be on a board and to be chosen and to be picked, etc. You put forward your candidacy one way or the other, and we'll talk later about how this happens. But you also have to understand who's on the other side of the table, who wants you and why, and what's the real reason why they're willing to have you on the board. And here, really, my advice would be, avoid being the useful idiot. I mean, if you are an independent director and you don't spend much time in the, let's say, daily life of the company, involved in the daily life of the company, you are at risk one way or the other of being manipulated, or at least given the impression of being manipulated, right? So if you care about your reputation, you really, really have to exercise a lot of, independent thought and skepticism, and be willing to ask a lot of questions. And again, sometimes boards are fantastic and the company is performing wonderfully and nobody has any complaints and the business is growing and the cash is returned to the shareholders, etc. And that's fabulous. But if the business is suffering and, the revenues are going down and you start restructuring and you get into a loop, etc., that gets into a fairly unpleasant situation for the board to manage. There's many cases of unpleasant situations and tasks that board members have to take care of. And this is especially in some roles, such as chairman or chairman of remuneration committee or nomination committee and so on. A couple of the unpleasant tasks, actually, one of the most important tasks as a whole that the board takes care of is hiring and firing the CEO. So the hiring is usually a good experience because you have a lot of optimism for the person who comes in, but the firing can be very messy, right? You saw maybe last week that Burberry decided to let go their CEO and they brought in someone else, etc. It's always a difficult decision, right? Or when it's not a difficult decision, it means that things were so deteriorated that it was not a difficult decision, which means it was unpleasant in other ways. But again, you think you're there to care for the business. You think you're there to contribute your ideas, your experience, etc. And then one day, this is another non-theoretical example. You find out that the CEO has allegations of sexual harassment against the employees. And so what do you do as a board member? You get a lot of fire under your seat because you have to start an investigation, you have to hire lawyers, you have to understand what happened, you have to protect the company, you have to protect the interests of all stakeholders, you have to be fair, and you have to, all of that, if you think, I'll join a board and, do this on, Friday night after 5 p.m., that is, typically not what happens, especially when you have difficulties. Another very unpleasant task is when you have fired the CEO to negotiate the severance and the non-compete agreement. And this is when, outgoing CEOs get pretty greedy. So about a few years ago, I had a particularly tough negotiation with an outgoing CEO. And it's something that, when I think about that particular board, it didn't leave me with a sweet taste in my mouth, so to speak. But having said that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my perspective as a non-executive director. Maybe a few things about compensation, which was one of the issues that Diana asked me to cover. Again, it's not a lot. It's not going to make a major difference in your life if you have a day job. It takes several, perhaps, board memberships to let go of your day job and just do this. So plan this correctly. And the compensation for a non-executive director who does not have a day-to-day job in a company is typically fixed. In some jurisdictions, so your mileage may vary, and this depends on local laws and local corporate governance codes. You can get a variable payment, but this is, more, let's say, in the startup stage for unlisted companies, etc., where it's kind of less regulated, and there's also less of a requirement that you demonstrate that you're truly independent. Once the company is listed, typically you are not incentivized the same way that CEO is incentivized, because you're actually having a role that has to guarantee all the stakeholders and the shareholders that, the CEO is not kind of accelerating revenue recognition to get their bonus, etc. So if you also have a bonus based on the current year's EBITDA or whatever, you would have an incentive to help the CEO do something that's not fine to do, right? So you actually don't have a variable compensation so that you don't have an incentive to do that. On the other hand, in some jurisdictions and some company bylaws, it is fairly common, on the other hand, for non-executive directors to have or to build up minimum shareholding requirements. So there's a policy called minimum shareholding policy or share ownership requirements, and it may be in the bylaws of the company stated as, all directors except for the CEO, different rules, different whatever, or need to build up a position in their personal portfolios where they own shares in the company after 3 years that they've been on the board that are equivalent to 200% of the yearly compensation that they derive from the board. So suppose a board gives you, let's say, 100K, whatever, dollars, euros, Swiss francs, etc. Then within 3 years, you have to hold 200K in equity of that company. And this is fairly, easy if you have time to build it up. But obviously, it's difficult because if the stock goes down, then you need to buy more shares to maintain that equivalence. And so you're kind of trapped in this loop where you're buying and the stock goes down because obviously you're a very small shareholder. And then you have to maintain that position for a certain time after you leave the board. So whenever you're approached about a board role in a listed company, do ask if they have a minimum shareholding policy and what the rules are around that. And also keep in mind that, you are compensated gross of taxes, but you buy the shares net of taxes, right? So my marginal tax rate, because I live in Italy, is 45%. So if the gross is, 100, then my net is 55, and it takes me a lot of time to get up to that type of ownership if I decide to reinvest my compensation in that type of share ownership requirement. So typically, you do not have an MBO, you do not have an LTI for the reasons which I just explained. So you will typically be doing a number of things on a board. The type of things that you do on a board depends on the committees that you join, and we can spend more time in the questions if you want to, ask about different committees, etc. But in general, the chairman or the vice chairman can be a part-time role. The CEO is usually a full-time role. Non-executive director is generally, again, except for crisis situation, a part-time role. How much time you're going to have to spend on this entirely depends, again, on how the company is doing, how the board is organized, what's the performance, what are issues. Do you have an expression of interest for someone who wants to buy the company? Because then you go into sort of full, mode, number crunching mode for weeks and weeks if you decide to, as a board, to accept or decline the offer, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I've been in very, very different situations. One of my last major boards that I left this year, I looked at the numbers for meetings and things we did over 2023. We had, I believe, 18 board meetings, 17 meetings of the Control and Risk Committee, 15 meetings of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee, and those were just the ones that I attended. And then there are other meetings with other committee members that I did not attend. But then, I'm talking to a headhunter about another potential board, and I looked at their numbers, and last year they had 4 board meetings, one every quarter, and 7 Control and Risk Committee meetings, and 1 Remuneration Committee meeting. So you can understand how, enormously different the workload can be. And because those numbers are typically also disclosed up front, you can see if you have time in your agenda for what kind of commitment and what kind of relationship with the company. And if you realize it's too much, it's obviously not a bad idea to say, no, this is not for me, or this is not, for this stage in my life, I'm doing more important things. Maybe I'll do this type of thing 5 years from now. How much fun you will have in the role, I think depends, in addition to the external factors that I just talked about. It will depend on the dynamics on the board, the relationship with the CEO, and the role that you manage to establish informally in addition to the formal roles. I have a governance mentor who has a framework for the role of the non-executive director, which is he calls the 5 C's. It's 5 things that start with a C. So non-executive directors do the following: control, compliance, challenge, contribute, and coach. So obviously, if you end up on a board where you have to do a lot of controls and a lot of compliance, unless you're a compliance fan, which, I understand, there's also a lot of people who have fun with that. You're not going to have as much fun as you would have talking about strategy or challenging the business plan or the industrial plan or contributing to a major initiative or coaching the CEO on something that you know better than the CEO does, et cetera, right? So the more you can move down these 5 C's and obviously, spend the right time on the upper C's and go down to the lower C's, challenge, contribute, and coach, to me, the more fun you're going to have. But it's often very difficult to tell up front. Sometimes you think you'll have a lot of, admin work in a listed company and a lot less in a non-listed company, but that's not necessarily true. So, for example, I spent a few years on the board of a company that had one shareholder, a private equity fund, and was being prepared for an IPO. And obviously had a lot of strategy questions and a lot of operations questions and a lot of, digital marketing issues where I thought I could apply my background and so on. But it turned out that private equity fund really only wanted the non-executive directors to put in place the control systems needed for the IPO and put in place some of the things around the ESG that the company was still missing and so on. So yes, we did a lot of work and ultimately the project was very successful. It was a dual track IPO on the one hand and private sale, and ultimately went to a private sale, and it made a ton of money for the private equity fund. But they basically kept us a little bit outside of the strategy of the operation. And they wanted the non-executive directors to do all the committee work with the compliance stuff and so on and so forth. So to me, theoretically, there could have been a very interesting experience. It still was, but a little bit less than I expected. And in some other situations, you can be on a super highly regulated board like an insurance company or a bank, but you can be involved in, how do we do our for example, corporate venture capital initiative from the corporate. Do you know about that? Can you help us? And that's tremendous fun if you have that expertise. And so you do that on top of doing the, risk committee every week and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of variety, and you really, really have to ask a lot of questions to understand what it's going to be like to be on that board, and how it could fit with your skills and your interest. I'm going to talk again, if this is boring, stop me, and then we'll do Q&A, a little bit about how to find your first major board. And, I will assume that, if you've been on a startup board, on a nonprofit board, etc., those are all good stepping stones. In fact, that's how I started out myself, because it helps to have, a line on your resume that says board of such and such, even if it's, American school in Milan where your kids go, etc. It's a nonprofit board, but it's a board, right? So people can't tell you don't have any board experience. You have that, right? My understanding is that in the UK and the US, that's where headhunters are more likely to be frequently involved in board searches. Other places, not so much. Other places is really a lot more word of mouth and reputation. And the people who identify prospective board members, be they shareholders, be they chairman of the board, chairman of the nomination committees, etc., they tend to rely on advisors and people that they trust. So when people ask me, so how do I get on people's radar screens as a potential interested board member with such and such skills? my advice is always, you probably know a number of corporate lawyers, a number of investment bankers, etc. Tell them that you're available for boards. I recently, a couple of months ago, spoke with a lawyer friend of mine in a reasonably sized law firms, and I said, look, I stepped off this major board. I have time for another one. If somebody asks you for names, etc., I'm willing to be considered if it's interesting, etc., etc. And they say, oh, it's good that you told me, because in the law firm, we have a shared folder where we collect all the resumes and board bios so that we have somewhere to pick them from when people ask us for names, right? So law firms, investment banks, accounting firms, these types of people will often be your friends and be able to give your name for board because they get asked with a reasonable frequency. I also want to, use a concept that I've learned recently, which is, of course, it's not a structured process. You need a bit of luck. But what you can do is you can extend your surface area of luck. What does that mean? Your surface area is like a rectangle, right? Where one axis is the competencies and skills you have developed that can be used for a board member. So strategic skills, transformation, transactional, M&A, whatever. And the other axis is, the people who know you have these skills and you wish to join a board. So if you have a lot of skills, but nobody knows, that surface area is very small, right? Or if a lot of people know, but you have no skills, then again, the more you work on both dimensions, the more this surface area becomes big, and the more you maximize the opportunity to land on a board that's good for you. We're at about half hour, so Diana, I think I'm going to stop there, and we can start with the questions.
I love this. And maybe just to warm up the Q&A, what I would like to ask you is if you can elaborate a little bit on the key difference between the profiles required for corporate, nonprofit, and advisory, and maybe also public boards. Do you think that they are different profiles that are required, or how to start navigating from that? I guess that you have given us a very nice way how to start looking for those board positions already.
Right. So, Diana, I don't think everybody looks for the same profile depending on what category they belong to, especially because the board up to a certain point works best if it's diverse, right? So for example, somebody believes that you need someone with legal experience on a board, which I personally don't think, is necessary. But if you have a board that's 100% made of legal people, then it's not going to be an effective board because there's too much groupthink, and they all have the same kind of mental frameworks, and they only look at some things in a situation and not the rest. So whatever your profile is, you can join a board as long as your profile is complementary and adds something different to what that board will have as a team formation, so to speak. So, of course, nonprofit, it helps if you have a bit of sensitivity or interest for the cause that the nonprofit works for. Listed and non-listed, again, listed companies will typically take up much more of your time as opposed to private or non-listed companies. I have non-listed company that's in a very peculiar governance situation because through a trust, the ultimate shareholder is the Catholic Church. So this company ended up in the will of the son of the founder, who died without heirs, and so he decided to leave the company to the Catholic Church. But having said that, they're very businesslike because, again, they appoint a trust of 3 trustees, and then the trustees appoint the board, and from then on it goes. It works exactly just like any other commercial company. The only difference is that Our dividend goes 100% to Caritas, which is run by the Catholic Church. And so hopefully it goes towards good works, and we feel good, and all the employees feel good because, we help a lot of people in need. But having said that, no, there's not a particular profile required to join a public or a private or whatever board. The only different thing I would say is, you mentioned advisory board. That's a different situation because an advisory board is, again, it is what it says. It gives advice to the CEO or to whoever, but it does not have the legal responsibilities of a true board of directors. So again, it might be a more fun experience. There's more flexibility and more creativity in how to structure that role because it's not regulated essentially. So that's the only thing where I would say it's different.
I love this question from Mukesh from SEP 2022, where he's asking what is the typical compensation for a non-executive board member? And I would like to enhance it as well with from the other side, like if you're in a startup funder that you're just forming your board, what typically can you offer potential board members as a compensation, or what is the typical thing that you will expect as a board member to receive from a company as well?
Yeah, wide range and variation, etc. So a lot of times you will find a collection of these numbers in reports done by headhunters. So for example, for Italy, which is the market that I'm most familiar with, I look at a report that's called Spencer Stuart Board Index 2024, or whatever the year is. And Spencer Stuart goes through all the remuneration reports of the listed companies in the market. And they take the top 100 companies in Italy and they calculate that, between the base fee and the committee fees and whatever, for the top 100 companies, the average, again, for a non-executive is about 80,000 euros, right? Gross. So, and then you have taxes, 45%, etc. So that's why I say you don't become rich. But again, that's the top 100 companies in the market. And then there's another, gazillion companies that within that, there's a range that goes from, let's say, 15, 20,000 to 100, 120, 180,000. And, obviously at the top end of the range, you have very few. And then there's a lot of companies outside those 100 where it's really determined by whatever the shareholders annual general meeting decides to approve based on the proposal of an outgoing board. So again, if a company is listed, you have this information available to you because it's in the reports that are published. If it's a non-listed company, maybe ask in advance before you waste a lot of time in discussions. I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
And there's a very interesting question here from Diana Stankovic in SEP 2023, where she's kind of following up on that question I was asking you, like when should an early stage startup form a board of directors with independent members, and then how does the founder balance either her or his interest, majority owner in the company versus installing good corporate governance? And I've known from, and I don't want to talk about this probably right now about it, but I know very awful and horror stories from founders that have lost either their seats for their CEOs positions by not having probably the right board members. So I guess it's a very crucial conversation. So when and then how to manage that interest?
Absolutely. I have a whole 1 hour workshop with slides for founders about how to manage corporate governance and how to have effective board meetings and so on and so forth. But you're right. I think as a general rule, with the first major funding round, so let's say a Series A or something post-seed, etc., it will make sense or be required that the board includes a representative of the lead investor in the Series A, right? And then as you move on to Series B and C and D, you will have maybe 2 lead investors, 3 lead investors with their representatives, and there may be observers and so on and so forth. Obviously, you know, as a founder, you try to control the board as long as you can. And that's a reason why you have to manage your dilution as you go about raising capital. Another thing to keep in mind that founders often don't think about, again, this depends a little bit on jurisdictions and corporate governance rules, because, for example, in the UK, it's very common and expected, even for smaller companies, that the roles of the chairman and the CEO are 2 different people. In the US, you have very often chairman and CEO in the same person, right? But if you have a split between chairman and CEO, if you get to choose the chairman and have that someone you trust and hopefully you look up to, that person can be a very strong ally in managing your board and making sure that the board runs smoothly, even when you have representatives of the investors.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to encourage everybody, like, if you guys have a burning question, please either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we'll be super happy to entertain your question over here. One thing that we probably didn't talk about was about board bio. And I would love Paola to maybe go back and, rather than tell us what to put in there, what is the typical mistake that people do that maybe we should avoid when building our board bio?
Yeah, so you can find very good templates, and I think, Diana, you can share a couple, including from Stanford. But in general, I also recently rewrote my board bio. I used to have the classical resume in chronological order. And because for a certain period in my life, I did both, you know, board roles and executive roles at the same time, you know, working nights and weekends, etc., it had gotten a little bit mixed up. It wasn't easy to read. So what I did in this latest version, I really focused on the board experience and used a full board bio format with a summary, which is what I bring to a board and what I bring to a board and why. My most notable accomplishments as a board member and as an executive, just to give people a flavor of actual things that I did and that had an impact. And then I listed all my board experience. And then I listed after that my professional experience, which is everything else that is not board. So, you know, if you're being considered for a board role, you know, just make it really clear what your board value proposition is and what you add from that point of view. My suggestion is, you know, do it well, have someone review it, etc. But again, you know, typically people will want you because they know you, not because you prepared a very good 2-page board bio. So don't obsess over it. I think your reputation is way more important than your board bio.
And I love this piece where you tell us, you know, go to your friend lawyers, you know, the accounting firm lawyers, or accounting firms friends that can give you these opportunities, you know, kind of like make yourself visible to them that you're looking for an opportunity. I guess that this is something that is super important in order to securing board roles. But and maybe thinking about getting ready. Let's say that you are about to get ready, or like you are already being selected to be a board member. How would you prepare yourself to your very first day on being a board, especially in the board dynamics? You know, many people think that being in a board is kind of like, yeah, whatever. But there's a lot of politics also sometimes that are involved in there. So what will be kind of like your 3 tips or the suggestions for us to follow in that order?
Yeah. Obviously, you know, the situation is different if The board is all new, so it's being formed or reformed because an entire board stepped off, and it's a brand new, like most of the people are new to the company, versus you are the new kid on the block and everybody else has been on the company's board for years and years, right? So if you are in this latter situation, listen a lot, observe a lot, ask questions, and try to learn and get up to speed as fast as you can. You have a little bit more latitude if everybody's new, because everybody's going to ask dumb questions, and so by definition they're not dumb questions. But keep also in mind that a well-structured company will give you a board induction, meaning that you will be trained. You will be trained by the company, both in what the business is. Often, if the training can be done, let's say, hands-on and feet on the ground, and you can visit the factories or sit in the call center or, talk to employees, etc., that will be very helpful to you to immerse yourself in the business. And they will also train you on how the board actually works. So this is how we do minutes of the board meetings. This is the process that we follow for, all these legal stuff that we need to do, etc. That is the responsibility of the company. So before you join the board, ask them, is there a board induction program? Because if there's not a board induction program, either they're willing to, build one, or it's a major red flag, because it means that you're ending up in there and maybe having to make decisions or vote on resolutions that, you're not fully comfortable with because you don't know the company enough. And that is a recipe for disaster. So try not to vote on, make or break resolutions before you finish the induction period.
Since you spoke to us about these 5 C's, which is the control, compliance, challenges, contribute, and coaching. I wonder, there's in the market several certification programs. Stanford has its own, Harvard has its own, INSEAD has its own. Do they really make a difference?
I think they don't hurt. I think more than the actual content, they're short programs, right? 3 days, 5 days, whatever. And they cost a ton of money. The value is in the signaling.
Just to give an idea to our friends, at Stanford, it's $15K. INSEAD is like about $35K, and Harvard is like 80 or something K. So
yeah,
they're not cheap. Yeah.
Lengths and different durations and so on. But again, you get to meet interesting people, and you get to signal that you're willing to go back to study to learn what it takes to be a good board member. But most long-time board members have gone through nothing of the sort, so it's definitely not a requirement. It may be something that you do for its signaling value. I would.
Right. So good for networking, good for signaling. Maria Alonso, SEP 2016, is asking, do boards really value the cultural and geographic diversity? And what about bringing a wide range of competencies to the board?
Yeah, again, that depends on the shareholders and ultimate decision makers, right? I think I was actually reading a report from one of the companies that I'm looking at, again, through this headhunter, and they said they really, really wanted to diversify their geographic provenance of their board members because they have a global market and so on and so forth. Again, you have to take into consideration what the working language is going to be. So, for example, I'm very lucky because I have been on the board of this Italian subsidiary of a French insurance company, which is AXA. And about 15 years ago, I believe AXA bought a major brokerage business in the United States. And they decided at that point that the corporate language was going to be English. So imagine that for a French company headquartered in Paris, right? I don't speak a word of French. I mean, I speak very few words, like, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, but that's...
Merci.
So I was lucky because I got into the right type of French company for me, because the committee meetings we do in English, and the board meetings in Italy we do in Italian with simultaneous translations for the French members of the board. But sometimes, language will be a limitation, right? Because if a company is in Germany and they want to hold the board meetings in German and all the papers are in German, yeah, of course, now we have AI tools, and it's a little bit easier to translate, etc. But you're never going to have the same fluency if you don't speak German as someone who is a native German speaker and can get the subtext and the jokes and so on and so forth, right? So
is it realistic to expect to be hired by, let's say, a board in the US if you are sitting in Europe, or vice versa? Do you think it's realistic?
That depends what they need you for. I mean, if they just made a major acquisition in Europe and they have nobody who understands Europe in the board, that could very well happen. Of course, it takes a lot of, commitment to travel, or, connect through video conferences at weird hours of the nights and so on. I've known people, sitting on European boards, living in Singapore. That happens. But obviously there needs to be a valid reason, like they really want your skills. And again, wide range of competencies. Again, for Maria, for let's say listed companies, this is typically monitored, because when they report out every year, they have to say, okay, this is our board composition and these are the different skills that are represented. Less if, quite frankly, they're private companies that they don't need to report anything to anybody. But I think for public companies, diversity of experiences and skills and backgrounds and careers is generally more and more appreciated, or more than it used to be in the past.
Amazing. Thank you, Maria, for the question. I see you there. And if you're trying to say anything, you were on mute. All right. Well, we're wrapping up of the hour. I want to make sure that everybody is please included. If you guys really have any questions, don't hesitate to unmute yourself and come on to the...
There's one by Algernon about the personality and style of boards. So,
great. Thank you, Algie. Thank you.
Some boards interact in a more cordial fashion with more decorum. Some boards interact in more freely combative and assertive style. That's a really good question. I have seen boards that are very cordial and very friendly and very collaborative, and I have seen boards where the shit hits the fan, right? I mean, I've seen things that should not happen in terms of, professional courtesy or mutual trust. And I've seen like all sorts of shit. You rarely can tell from the outside. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to assess when you're about to consider a board, unless you know someone who has firsthand experience of the situation. So if you're really, undecided because you think it might be a more combative style than you're ready for, or than you have time for, because, combative is also more time consuming, and you have, ways to reach out informally to someone who's not going to betray your confidence and give you some real answers, try to do that, but that can also backfire, right? So be very careful in making these inquiries. Sometimes through, personal or professional networks, you can reach the person who has a seat at the table and can tell you a little bit without violating the confidence of the role. But again, if you read on the papers that, the shit hits the fan every board meeting lasts 10 hours, that is typically a good indicator then that's a fairly contentious board. But again, if the company is not big enough to be on the front pages of the newspaper, or you really have no way to tell. You really have no way to tell if you don't know anybody.
Interesting.
You could find anything. You could find heaven or hell, and it's very, very difficult.
I see that Tito from 2022 is asking us, which role is more interesting for you if you have to choose one, NCC or audit committee?
Okay, NCC, I assume, is nomination and compensation committee and audit committee. Sometimes you get to do both, right? I mean, if there are few independent directors, everybody has to be on the committees, and so you get to do both. In terms of ultimate impact on the company, of course both are important. Audit committee is incredibly important in a number of situations where you have to put things back on the correct rails. Nomination and compensation. I mean, nomination committee is very interesting because you ultimately support the board in the decision of who should be CEO or whether the current CEO should no longer be the CEO, and so on and so forth, right? So in terms of like pure, let's say, power and impact, I would say nomination is very, very interesting, especially in transitions, but it's also going to take a lot of your time, and you're going to cancel vacations and spend Christmas and New Year's with your cell phone on and have a lot of people calling you at all hours of the day and night. And, this happened to me, so I speak from experience. My sense is the other thing that the compensation or remuneration committee gives you in many contexts is you get to talk to investors, because you will present the remuneration policy to the annual general meeting of the company. And therefore, you get to talk to investors to understand what they expect, how they react to certain proposals before they're finalized. And you also get to talk to, let's say, people like ISS or Glass Lewis, who are proxy advisors. And it's a profession that basically helps large institutional investors decide what to vote in AGMs, right? So they will publish a report on your, remuneration report, both the remuneration that you paid to the managers and the remuneration that you propose to pay with the new policy. And so all of that takes a lot of meetings to collect feedback on, report to the committee, work, go to the board, finalize, evolve, etc. So there's more external exposure, especially for the chair of the compensation committee, than there is for the chair of the audit committee or the chair of the related party transactions committee or the chair of the ESG committee or whatever. At least that's been my experience. And at the same time, it's a lot of commitment, especially when the AGM is coming near, because you have a lot of meetings with all these people to which you have to explain, here's why we did this to our policy and please vote in favor, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you. We're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you, Paola, so much for sharing all your expertise and insights today. Thank you truly for an amazing session. Thank you, SEPers, for this active participation and questions around it. It has been amazing to have you. A reminder that this session is being recorded, so we're going to share it with the SEPers network. And if you have any further questions, well, don't hesitate to let us know. I shared again in our chat the link for our SEP reunion in India. I'm hoping to see many of you over there. It's going to be amazing. And Paola, once again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Diana. Have a good evening, everybody in Europe. A good day, everybody else. Good night, Asia. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and happy summer, everybody. If you guys are in there, please show your face so I can take a little photo, and then we will post it, and we can create some FOMO to everybody. Yeah, okay. I got it. Yes, beautiful. Thank you, Ana Luisa, Maria, Tito. I have you, Manuel, Anupam. Hey, Georgie, fantastic. Yes, we're going to do a super little photo. Yeah, great. Thank you. All right. Yeah, if you have your, also, Mario, come on. Lisa, yeah, already. Say hello, everybody. Thank you, Michael, for being here. Thanks. Amazing. Yes, I have everybody now. Super. Thank you, guys. See you soon. Have fun. Appreciate
Bye.
it. Thank you, Paola. Bye bye.